The Daily Mirror is absolutely determined to suggest that Harry and his chances of returning to the United Kingdom hinge completely on managing to win over King Charles and Queen Camilla, because he knows that Prince William will end up banishing him. But of course,
Ladies and gentlemen, what I am about to walk you through today is not satire. It is not parody. It is not some fevered tabloid invention. This is what has been reported, and what sources close to the palace have confirmed in various accounts about the latest extraordinary chapter in the saga of Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Their lawyers were shown the door. Politely, one presumes, because this is Buckingham Palace, but shown the door nonetheless. And the question we must ask ourselves, the question that hangs over this entire debacle like a storm cloud that simply refuses to break, is this: at what point does audacity become delusion? Let's find out. Let us begin with the figure itself, because numbers of this magnitude deserve to be understood in context. $330 million. That is approximately £260 million sterling. To put that in perspective, the entire sovereign grant, the public funding mechanism for the British monarchy's official duties, was roughly £86 million in the most recent financial year. So what the Sussexes reportedly demanded is, in effect, more than 3 times the annual operational budget of the entire British Crown. For what exactly? Well, this is where it becomes truly fascinating, and by fascinating, I mean breathtaking in its sheer nerve. Reports indicate that the Sussex legal team arrived with a comprehensive proposal, if one can dignify it with that term, outlining the conditions under which Harry and Meghan would agree to what has been euphemistically described as a royal reconciliation. A coming together, a healing of the rift, a restoration of relations, except that it wasn't a reconciliation proposal at all. It was, by every reasonable interpretation, a ransom note dressed in legal language. The reported demands included financial compensation for what the Sussexes characterized as lost earnings and reputational damage suffered during their time as working royals. They included provisions for ongoing security funding, paid naturally by the British taxpayer. They included demands regarding titles, regarding future roles, regarding what can only be described as having their cake, eating it, selling the recipe to Netflix, and then demanding a second cake. Now pause with me here for just a moment. Lost earnings, reputational damage. During their time as working royals, Meghan Markle was a moderately successful television actress before she married into the royal family. Her net worth at the time of her engagement to Prince Harry was estimated at around $5 million. Today, after leaving the royal family, after the Oprah interview, after the Netflix deal, after the Spotify deal, after the memoir, her combined net worth with Harry is estimated at well over $100 million. The royal family didn't damage her earning potential. The royal family was her earning potential. Every dollar she has made since 2020 has been made because she married a prince. Every Netflix pitch, every Spotify episode. Every Archetypes podcast that Spotify famously decided wasn't worth continuing. Every single revenue stream flows from one source and one source only, the Crown. And now she wants the Crown to compensate her for the privilege of having made her globally famous. The audacity is almost architectural in its construction now. Let us talk about what happened when this legal delegation actually arrived at Buckingham Palace. Because this is in many ways the most satisfying part of the entire story. The palace, according to multiple reports, did not engage in lengthy negotiations. There was no counteroffer. There was no, well, perhaps we could meet in the middle at $165 million. There was no committee formed, no working group established, no mediator appointed. The lawyers were heard. And then they were asked to leave. One source described the palace response as polite but unequivocal. Another used the word bemused, which, if you understand the British talent for understatement, translates roughly to utterly gobsmacked by the sheer brass neck of it. And this, I think, tells us something profoundly important about where the palace now stands in relation to the Sussexes. Because for years, the institution was criticized for being too passive, too accommodating, too willing to bend over backwards to avoid public conflict with Harry and Meghan. Never complain, never explain was the motto. And for a long time, critics argued that this silence was being weaponized against the palace. Every unanswered accusation became, in the court of public opinion, an admitted truth. Every allegation left unchallenged became settled fact. Meghan and Harry controlled the narrative because the palace refused to fight for it, but something has shifted. King Charles, whatever his faults, and he has many, as any honest assessment would acknowledge, appears to have drawn a line. A clear, unmistakable, immovable line, and that line reads, you cannot leave this family, profit from attacking this family, and then invoice this family for the privilege of returning. It is, when you strip away all the noise, a remarkably simple position. And a remarkably correct one, but to truly understand why this latest episode matters, we need to zoom out. We need to see it not as an
tea and scones, and
she's got
her royal crest. I mean, isn't there a contradiction
she'll look at anything there that will make the money. I mean, she's simply, she's got a brass neck, as we'd say. She really doesn't bother her. She can see this way. She's probably looked at the king selling selling the Duchy originals for charity and all that sort of stuff, and thought, well, and it's almost, you look at the actual the logos and everything.
Isolated incident, but as part of a pattern that has been repeating with escalating intensity since Meghan Markle first entered public life as a member of the royal family. The pattern is this: grievance, demand, rejection, public complaint. Repeat, think back to the very beginning, the engagement interview. Harry and Meghan sat with the BBC, and even then, even in that moment of supposed joy, Meghan could not resist the barb. "I didn't know much about the royal family," she said, as though marrying into the most famous family on earth was a casual afterthought, something she stumbled into without curiosity or research. That was the first signal. That studied casualness, that carefully crafted narrative of the outsider who never sought the spotlight, who was simply swept up in love, who had no idea what she was getting into, was of course nonsense. Meghan Markle had been fascinated by the royal family. There are photographs of her as a young woman posing outside Buckingham Palace. She had researched Harry. She had cultivated connections in London's social circles. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she did it brilliantly. That is not a criticism of ambition. Ambition is admirable. But the pretense of accidental royalty, that was the first dishonesty in a long chain of dishonesties. Then came the wedding, a spectacular event. The world watched. The institution embraced her with open arms. The Queen herself, broke protocol, bent tradition, accommodated every request. A gospel choir at Windsor. Meghan's mother seated in prominence. Every reasonable effort made to ensure Meghan felt welcomed, honoured, included. And what was the response? Within months, briefings began to emerge about how unhappy Meghan was, how stifling the institution was, how she wasn't being supported, how she was being silenced. The staff complaints began, reports of bullying. Allegations that Meghan had reduced palace aides to tears. These weren't tabloid inventions. These were formal complaints lodged by palace staff, investigated internally and serious enough that senior officials raised them as concerns. Meghan's response: she was the victim, always the victim. The institution was against her. The press was against her. The family was against her. Everyone, the entire apparatus of the British establishment, had conspired to make this one woman miserable. It is a narrative that requires you to believe that every single person Meghan Markle has ever clashed with was in the wrong. Every aide who complained, every family member who raised concerns, every journalist who asked legitimate questions, every protocol she refused to follow, all of them wrong. And Meghan, always, invariably, without exception, right. That is not the profile of a victim. That is the profile of someone who cannot accept accountability. And we must talk about Harry. Because he is not a bystander in this. He is not some helpless puppet being manipulated against his will. He is a grown man making choices, catastrophically bad choices, in the view of many, but choices nonetheless. Harry had every advantage life could offer. He was born into privilege that most human beings cannot even conceptualize. He had wealth, status, purpose, a role in one of the most respected institutions in the world, and a family that, despite its dysfunctions, loved him. What does he have now? He has a mansion in Montecito. He has rapidly diminishing Netflix and Spotify deals. He has a memoir that burned every bridge he ever had. He has a wife whose popularity ratings on both sides of the Atlantic continue to fall. And he has, by every credible account, almost no remaining relationship with his father, his brother, or the institution that defined his entire identity. Was it worth? Here is the tragic irony at the heart of the Sussex story. Harry left the royal family because he said he wanted freedom. Freedom from the press, freedom from protocol, freedom from scrutiny. And what has he done with that freedom? He has spent every single day since his departure talking about the royal family, writing about the royal family, giving interviews about the royal family, producing content about the royal family. His entire post-royal career is parasitic upon the institution he claims to have escaped. He is not free. He is trapped in a perpetual cycle of grievance and monetization, unable to move forward because moving forward would mean finding something to talk about other than his family, and he has demonstrated no capacity to do that. And now, the lawyers. The $330 million demand. The ultimate expression of a mindset that views family relationships as transactional, reconciliation as negotiable, and love as something that comes with terms and conditions. Let us interrogate this figure more closely. $330 million. Where does such a number even come from? What accounting, what valuation, what formula produces a demand of this magnitude? One must assume it includes projected earnings, the money Meghan and Harry believe they would have made had they remained as working royals, combined with some calculation
is that Harry's last hope actually hinges on a future King William. Now, two absolute veteran royal authors, Robert Jobson and Tom Bower, came together over the weekend. And it was a fascinating discussion to see these big beasts in royal reporting.
brand damage they claim to have suffered. It likely includes security costs, which Harry has been fighting about in British courts for years. It may include some provision for the children, Archie and Lilibet, and their future within or adjacent to the royal structure. But here is what is so fundamentally offensive about it. Reconciliation is not a business transaction. You do not send lawyers to negotiate a family reunion. You do not attach a price tag to forgiveness. You do not present your father, your own father, with an invoice as a precondition for speaking to him again. This is not how families work. This is not how human relationships work. And the fact that Meghan and Harry apparently believe this approach would succeed tells you everything you need to know about how profoundly disconnected they have become from reality, from decency, from the basic norms of human interaction. The palace was right to show those lawyers the door. In fact, one could argue the palace showed remarkable restraint in not releasing a public statement, expressing its utter incredulity, and the public knows it. The British public, the Commonwealth public, even significant portions of the American public, they see through it now. The initial sympathy that existed for Harry and Meghan, and there was genuine sympathy, particularly after the Oprah interview, has evaporated. Poll after poll shows their approval ratings in freefall. In the UK, Meghan's favourability is now consistently in single digits among certain demographics. Even in the United States, where she once enjoyed strong support, the numbers have declined sharply. Why? Because people are not stupid. People can recognise a pattern. People can see when grievance becomes a business model, when victimhood becomes a brand, when every public utterance is calculated for maximum damage to others and maximum benefit to oneself. The public gave Meghan the benefit of the doubt. They gave it to her repeatedly, after the Oprah interview, after the Netflix documentary, after Spare. They kept giving it and she kept spending it, and now the account is empty. And this latest episode, the lawyers, the demand, the palace rejection, will only accelerate that decline, because it confirms what critics have been saying for years. This was never about family. This was never about healing. This was never about doing the right thing. This was about money. It was always about money, so where do we go from here? The palace has made its position clear. The door is closed, not permanently perhaps, but certainly to any approach that arrives accompanied by legal counsel and a 9-figure price tag. King Charles, by all accounts, remains open to personal reconciliation with his son. Not a transactional one, not a negotiated settlement. A personal, private, genuine reconciliation, father to son, without lawyers, without demands, without conditions. Whether Harry is capable of accepting that offer, without Meghan's involvement, without the legal apparatus, without the financial component, remains the great unanswered question. Because the suspicion, and it is widely held, rightly or wrongly, is that Harry no longer makes his own decisions. That the man who once served with distinction in Afghanistan, who created the Invictus Games, who was beloved by an entire nation, has been so thoroughly absorbed into Meghan's worldview that he can no longer distinguish between her interests and his own. That is a tragedy. A genuine human tragedy, separate from the politics and the media circus and the cultural commentary. A man who lost his mother at 12 years old, who never fully processed that grief, who found someone who made him feel protected and understood, and who has followed that person so far from his own life that he may never find his way back. But tragedy does not excuse behavior. And sending lawyers to your father's house with a $330 million invoice is not the action of a man who wants reconciliation. It is the action of a man who has been told that reconciliation has a price, and who has been convinced, by someone, that his family should pay, is the fundamental truth that Meghan Markle has never understood about the British monarchy, and perhaps never will. The crown is not a brand. It is not a platform. It is not a content opportunity. It is not a negotiating counterparty. It is an institution that has endured for over 1,000 years. It has survived civil wars, world wars, abdications, scandals, and revolutions. It has outlasted every challenge, every crisis, every individual who believed they were bigger than the institution itself. Meghan Markle is not bigger than the crown. Harry is not bigger than the crown. Their demands, their grievances, their lawyers, their Netflix deals, none of it is bigger than the crown, and the crown knows it. That is why the lawyers were shown the door. It is why the $330 million demand was rejected without negotiation. That is why the palace's response was not anger, not outrage, but something far more devastating to someone like Meghan: indifference. The palace simply does not care enough about the Sussex demands to engage with them. And for someone who has built her entire post-royal identity on her relationship, adversarial though it may be with the institution, that indifference is the cruelest response imaginable. Because here is the thing about Meghan Markle that her most devoted supporters have never been willing to acknowledge, and that her critics have been saying for years. There is a ceiling to how far charm can carry you. There is a limit to how long a carefully constructed narrative can substitute for substance. There is a point, and we have now definitively reached it, where the gap between the story Meghan tells about herself and the reality that everyone else can plainly see becomes so wide, so impossible to bridge, that even the most sympathetic observer has to step back and ask the question. The lawyers came. The lawyers presented their case. And the lawyers were sent home, and we need to talk about why, not just the mechanics of it, not just the headline figure, though we will absolutely get to that. But the deeper why, the cultural why, the psychological why, because this moment did not emerge from nowhere. It is the logical, inevitable conclusion of a story that has been building for years, written by someone who genuinely believed she was the author of everyone else's narrative as well as her own. She was wrong. And the consequences of that miscalculation are now playing out in real time, for the entire world to watch. Let us establish something clearly before we go any further, because it matters enormously to everything that follows. Meghan Markle is an intelligent woman. Let us not pretend otherwise, because the pretense would be insulting to the audience and dishonest in its own right. She is sharp, she is strategic, she is socially perceptive in ways that many people are not, and she has demonstrated throughout her life a remarkable ability to identify opportunities and position herself to take advantage of them. These are not small qualities. In many contexts, they would be celebrated without qualification, but intelligence unchecked by honesty becomes manipulation. Strategy divorced from ethics becomes exploitation. Social perception, weaponized in the service of personal advancement at the expense of others, becomes something considerably darker than ambition. And what we have witnessed over the past several years, what the Sussex legal demand represents in its most concentrated form, is exactly that darker thing. It is intelligence deployed not in the service of genuine connection or genuine purpose, but in the service of extraction, of taking, of demanding what has not been earned and framing the refusal to provide it as an act of aggression. $330 million. Let that number sit for a moment. Really sit with it. $330 million is the figure that Sussex legal representatives apparently believed represented fair compensation, or fair terms, for some form of reconciliation with the royal family, for a restoration of relations. For the Sussexes' agreement to, presumably, stop doing what they have been doing, which is to say, systematically dismantling the reputation of the institution and the individuals within it, one interview, one podcast, one memoir chapter at a time. Now, there are two ways to read this demand. The charitable reading is that it represents a genuine, if catastrophically misjudged, attempt to quantify real losses and real grievances, filtered through a legal framework that both parties might find acceptable. An attempt, however clumsy and however tone-deaf, to find a structured resolution to a genuine dispute. That is the charitable reading. And I want you to hold it in your mind for approximately the next 30 seconds, because that is about as long as it survives contact with reality. The uncharitable reading, which is to say, the accurate reading, is that this demand was never intended to be accepted. It was designed to be rejected, because a rejected demand from the palace gives the Sussexes something they have demonstrated, repeatedly and consistently, they value above almost everything else: a grievance, fresh material, another chapter in the ongoing narrative of Sussex victimhood. Another piece of evidence for the prosecution in the case Meghan Markle has been building against the British royal family since approximately 2019, the verdict of which she has already decided and intends to deliver again and again to any audience willing to pay for a ticket. This is the game. And the palace, to its considerable credit, has finally stopped playing it to understand how we arrived at this moment. You have to go back. Not just to the Oprah interview, though that was certainly a turning point. Not just to the Megxit announcement, though that too was seismic in its implications. You have to go back further, to the very foundation of the Sussex public identity, to the scaffolding upon which everything else was built. And that scaffolding was constructed from a single load-bearing beam. The idea of Meghan Markle as a woman ahead of her time, misunderstood by a backward institution, welcomed by the public but persecuted by the establishment, a modern woman trapped in a medieval structure that could not accommodate her. It is, you must admit, a compelling story. It has all the elements of great drama: the outsider, the system, the struggle, the resilience. There is only one problem with it. It requires the active suppression of an enormous quantity of inconvenient facts. The fact that the royal family went to extraordinary lengths to accommodate Meghan in ways they had never accommodated anyone before. The fact that the Queen, a woman who had spent 70 years in service to an institution built on tradition and protocol, personally overrode decades of convention to make Meghan feel included and celebrated. The fact that multiple palace aides, people with no agenda, no book deal, no Netflix documentary, raised formal complaints about their treatment at Meghan's hands.
Edible flowers the next, shortbread, tea, wine. She's like a loose cannon.
But as a PR, you must be looking at this being like, why is she not listening to anyone? Like, there's no strategy behind what she's doing.
You're right, there is no strategy, because I was looking into everything they've done and I thought, who are you trying to appeal to? You know, we have children in this country who are going to breakfast
club. The fact that friendships and professional relationships crumbled around her with a regularity that in any other context would prompt serious reflection about who the common denominator might be. None of this fits the narrative, so none of this is acknowledged. Instead, it is reframed, dismissed, or simply ignored, because acknowledging it would require a degree of self-examination that the Sussex brand cannot survive, because the Sussex brand is built entirely on innocence, on blamelessness, on the unshakable conviction that every difficulty, every conflict, every disappointment in Meghan's life has been visited upon her by external forces acting in bad faith. And when your entire public identity is constructed around your own faultlessness, self-reflection becomes existential threat, because the moment you admit to a single error, a single misjudgment, a single moment of having caused harm rather than suffered it, the entire architecture collapses, so it never happens. It cannot happen. And so the demands escalate and the grievances multiply, and the lawyers are dispatched to palaces with 9-figure price tags, because in a worldview where you are always the victim, the only logical response to rejection is to increase the demand. There is a woman in this story who does not get discussed nearly enough. And that is Kate, the Princess of Wales, because Kate represents something that is, to the Sussex narrative, genuinely inconvenient. She represents evidence that the system works. Evidence that the institution can accommodate a modern woman, a woman of warmth and intelligence and genuine public appeal, without destroying her, without silencing her, without making her miserable. Kate did not have an easy introduction to royal life. The press was brutal to her in the early years, far more personally brutal in many respects than anything Meghan faced. She was mocked for her family's background. She was photographed in ways that violated her privacy in the most fundamental terms imaginable. She endured years of criticism about her work ethic, her ambition, her relationship with William. And she navigated all of it without a single briefing against her family-in-law, without a single tell-all interview, without a single legal demand. She simply got on with it. She showed up. She did the work. She earned the affection of the British public through consistency, through grace, through genuine engagement with the causes and the people she serves. And the public loves her for it. Genuinely loves her. Not the manufactured adoration of a carefully managed brand, but the real, durable, unconditional affection that comes from watching someone conduct themselves with dignity over a sustained period of time. This comparison is devastating to the Sussex narrative. So the Sussex narrative does not engage with it directly. Instead, it is worked around, undermined obliquely, muddied with stories about crying over bridesmaids' dresses and alleged tensions that may or may not have occurred in the exact form described. Because if Kate thrived in the institution that Meghan says destroyed her, then the institution is not the problem. And that is a conclusion the Sussex brand cannot afford to reach. Let us talk about the money. Not just the $330 million, though we will return to that, but the broader financial picture of the Sussex operation, because it is genuinely illuminating. When Harry and Meghan left royal life, they did so with a stated desire to become financially independent, to stand on their own feet, to build something of their own on their own terms without reliance on the Crown or the British taxpayer. It was in principle an admirable aspiration. If you want to leave, leave. If you want to build your own life, build it. That is a legitimate choice, even if the manner of its execution left much to be desired. But here is what actually happened: the Netflix deal, reportedly worth in the region of $100 million, a staggering sum, enough to secure financial independence for multiple generations. What did it produce? A documentary, Harry and Meghan, that was watched widely but critically savaged for its self-pity and its factual inconsistencies. And a children's animated series called Pearl, which was cancelled before a single episode was released. The Spotify deal, reportedly worth around $25 million. What did it produce? One series of the Archetypes podcast, which had a reasonable audience but nowhere near the cultural impact that justified the price tag. Spotify terminated the relationship without renewing the contract. A Spotify executive was quoted in terms that became somewhat famous, suggesting the partnership had not delivered what was expected. The memoir, Spare, a bestseller undeniably, but a bestseller that, in the judgment of many who read it, revealed far more about Harry's state of mind than it did about any genuine institutional wrongdoing. A book that contained claims subsequently disputed by multiple parties. A book that, in trying to expose the royal family, arguably exposed its author more comprehensively than anyone else. The Archetypes podcast revival, No Renewal, American Riviera Orchard. Meghan's lifestyle brand launched with considerable fanfare, followed by almost complete public silence regarding actual products available for actual purchase. The pattern across all of these ventures is the same. A large, attention-generating announcement, a burst of coverage, underwhelming execution, quiet retreat. And now, against this backdrop of declining commercial momentum, the lawyers arrive at Buckingham Palace with a demand for $330 million. You do not need to be a forensic accountant to understand what that figure represents. It represents a business in trouble seeking a rescue. It has dressed up as a reconciliation. The security question deserves its own examination, because it is perhaps the most revealing element of the entire Sussex legal strategy. Harry has been fighting the British government through the courts for years over the withdrawal of his publicly funded security detail following his decision to step back from royal duties. He has lost, repeatedly, at multiple levels of the judicial system. British judges applying British law have consistently found that the decision to withdraw that security was lawful and proportionate. Harry's response to these legal defeats has not been acceptance, it has been escalation. He has continued to fight. He has spoken publicly about his fears for his family's safety. He has framed the withdrawal of security as evidence of institutional hostility, as further proof of the malice he believes the establishment bears toward him. But here is the fundamental contradiction at the heart of this position. Harry chose to leave. He chose to move to America. He chose to build a life outside the structure that provided that security. He was not pushed out. He was not expelled. He made a voluntary decision to walk away from royal duties, and with that decision came the entirely predictable consequence that the protections associated with those duties would not travel with him across the Atlantic indefinitely. You cannot simultaneously demand the freedom of private life and the protection of public life. You cannot step away from the responsibilities of the Crown while insisting on retaining all of its privileges. You cannot leave the building and then be surprised when they change the locks. The inclusion of security demands in the Sussex legal package is not, at its core, about safety. If it were about safety, Harry would have engaged with the independent review processes available to him more constructively, rather than deploying them as public grievance fodder. It is about leverage. It is about finding a pressure point, a point at which the palace might feel morally and publicly obligated to negotiate, and pressing on it. The palace felt no such obligation. And good for them, there is a moment that crystallizes something essential about this entire situation. It occurred during the Oprah interview, the conversation that, more than any other single event, defined how the world came to understand the Sussex departure. Meghan was speaking about her experience of suicidal ideation during her time as a royal. It was a serious moment. It was a moment that deserved and received serious attention. And if those feelings were genuine, and there is no reason to categorically deny that they might have been, then they represent a real and important human story about the pressures of public life and the inadequacy of institutional mental health support. But in that same interview, Meghan made a claim that was subsequently investigated and found to be, at minimum, significantly misleading. She stated that she and Harry were married privately, just the two of them, 3 days before the official Windsor ceremony. The Archbishop of Canterbury, who officiated both ceremonies, clarified publicly that the earlier event was a rehearsal, not a legal wedding. Why does this matter? It matters because it is a small thing. A small, unnecessary, verifiable falsehood in an interview full of much larger claims that cannot be verified at all. And the presence of small, verifiable falsehoods in a narrative built largely on unverifiable claims tells you something important about the relationship between the narrator and the truth. It tells you that the narrative comes first, that the emotional arc, the story Meghan wants you to feel, takes precedence over the factual record. That details are adjusted, shaded, embellished in the service of a larger impression that Meghan wishes to create. And once you see that pattern, you cannot unsee it. Every subsequent claim, every subsequent allegation, every subsequent demand carries with it this shadow, the possibility that the version of events being presented has been curated for effect rather than accuracy. King Charles is a complicated man. Nobody serious would dispute that. His marriage to Diana was a human disaster that played out in the most public and painful terms imaginable. His emotional distance from his sons during their childhoods is well documented and by most accounts genuinely damaging. He is a man with real flaws, real failures, real responsibilities he did not always meet, but he is also a man who is dying, who has been diagnosed with cancer, who is attempting to fulfill the duties of the kingship while managing a serious illness. And who, by multiple accounts, still wants a relationship with his younger son, not a transactional relationship, not a negotiated relationship, a real one, a human one. Father and son, the response to that desire was to send lawyers with a bill. And whatever your view of the monarchy, whatever your view of Charles's conduct as a father, whatever your position on the Sussex departure, there is something in that image that should give any person pause. because it is not a royal story. It is a human story. A son estranged from a dying father, choosing legal process over personal.
Harry is desperate to get back, one way or
Yes.
another. Meghan couldn't care two hoots.
Amen. She's selling
she's
her
in
booze.
California. She doesn't want to come back here.
Yeah.
She's got what she needed. She's got a title. The C-rated actress is now a global star. She's got everything,
she's got everything
and
for
money.
it, yeah.
So for her, and that's what's so interesting, is the division.
Yes.
And of course, people always say, well, can the marriage last? I think Harry is so devoted to his children
Yeah.
that the thought of
Connection. That choice was not made in a vacuum. It was made within a relationship, within a marriage, where one partner's appetite for conflict with the institution appears to be significantly greater than the other partner's apparent desire for reconciliation. This is perhaps the most painful dimension of the entire saga. Because whatever Meghan Markle's faults, and they are considerable and well documented, the person most visibly diminished by this story is not Meghan. She is resilient, she is strategic. She will adapt and survive and launch another lifestyle brand and give another interview and file another legal complaint. The person most visibly diminished is Harry, a man who wanted to be loved and found someone who told him his family didn't love him. A man who wanted to be understood and found someone who offered him a simpler story, one in which he was the hero, his family were the villains, and the solution to every problem was more distance and more legal correspondence. It is not a love story. It is a cautionary tale. Here is what the ejection of the Sussex lawyers from Buckingham Palace actually represents, stripped of all its drama and all its symbolism, and all the inevitable spin that will surround it in the coming days and weeks. It represents the palace drawing a distinction that should never have needed to be drawn in the first place. The distinction between family and business, between reconciliation and negotiation, between love and transaction. These are distinctions that most human beings understand intuitively, without legal guidance. You do not invoice your father. You do not attach conditions to forgiveness. You do not send intermediaries to negotiate the terms of a relationship that was supposed to be unconditional. But when you have spent years constructing a worldview in which every relationship is evaluated through the lens of what it can provide, what it can offer, what it can deliver in terms of platform and profile and financial return, you lose the ability to see relationships any other way. They all become transactional because you have made them all transactional, and eventually you stop being able to imagine that anyone relates to anyone else on any other basis. That appears to be where the Sussexes are. And it is a lonely, impoverished way to live. Regardless of how large the Montecito mansion might be, the crown endures. It has always endured. It will continue to endure long after the Sussex brand has been rebranded, relaunched, redirected, and eventually forgotten by the Netflix algorithm and the Spotify playlist and the lifestyle magazine that will, in time, find another aspirational couple to feature on its cover. The palace showed the lawyers the door not because it is cruel, not because it is indifferent to genuine human suffering, not because it cannot change or adapt or grow. It showed the lawyers the door because some things cannot be bought. Some relationships cannot be invoiced. Some doors, once you have walked through them freely of your own volition, do not open again simply because you have decided the grass on the other side was not as green as advertised. And the latest revelation, that Sussex lawyers were dispatched to Buckingham Palace carrying demands amounting to $330 million as a precondition for any form of royal reconciliation, only to be promptly and unceremoniously shown the exit, is not merely a story about one extraordinary piece of legal overreach. Cast your mind back to 2016. Meghan Markle is a working actress, known primarily for her role in the legal drama Suits, living a comfortable and professionally satisfying life that intersects at various points with the world of philanthropy, fashion, and lifestyle media. She maintains a successful blog called The Tig, a name derived from a wine she enjoyed, through which she cultivates a personal brand centered around aspiration, wellness, travel, and what might be described as elevated living for the modern woman. It is a modest platform by today's standards, but it is thoughtfully constructed and genuinely reflective of what appears to be an authentic sensibility. She is articulate, she is charming, she photographs well, she gives considered interviews about gender equality and global development that suggest genuine engagement with issues beyond the celebrity bubble. In short, she is impressive. On her own terms, operating within her own sphere, she is a genuinely impressive person. And then she meets Harry, and from that moment, from the very moment the relationship becomes public knowledge, something shifts. Not immediately visible, not immediately dramatic, but a shift nonetheless. A shift in scale, a shift in stakes. A shift in the nature of what is possible and therefore in the nature of what is desired, because Harry is not a television actor. Harry is not a lifestyle blogger. Harry is a prince, an actual, literal prince, fifth in line to the throne at the time of their meeting. A global figure, an institution made flesh, and the woman who marries him does not merely gain a husband. She gains a platform of almost incomprehensible magnitude, a reach and a resonance that no amount of blogging or acting or lifestyle branding could ever approximate. The question that matters, the question that everything which followed depends upon, is what Meghan Markle intended to do with that platform. And the answer, written across 5 years of observable behavior, is simultaneously simple and deeply troubling. She intended to own it. Entirely, on her own terms, without compromise, without deference, without the institutional constraints that the platform came attached to. She wanted the audience without the obligation, the reach without the responsibility, the crown, metaphorically speaking, without the crown, institutionally speaking. And when it became apparent that this was not an available option, that the platform and the institution were inseparable, that you could not have one without accepting the other, the institution became the enemy. There is a word that appears repeatedly in accounts of Meghan Markle's time as a working royal, offered by people across the spectrum of her acquaintance, from senior palace officials to junior household staff to journalists who covered her arrival and departure. The word is control. Not control in the sense of personal discipline or professional standards, though those qualities are present as well. Control in a more specific, more interpersonal sense, the need to control narratives, to control perceptions, to control what is said, what is shown, what is known, and what is not. Former aides describe an environment in which communication from the Sussex household was carefully and sometimes anxiously managed, in which the line between legitimate press management and something more aggressive was regularly tested, in which staff members who were perceived as insufficiently loyal to the Sussex narrative found their positions becoming untenable. These accounts are not the inventions of hostile tabloids. They are the testimony of people who worked in close proximity to Meghan and Harry and emerged from that experience with stories that, taken individually, might be dismissed as professional grievances, but taken collectively describe something more systematic. And the formal bullying complaint, the investigation commissioned by Buckingham Palace into allegations that Meghan had contributed to a working environment in which staff were reduced to tears and several experienced employees requested transfers, is not a tabloid story. It is a documented institutional response to concerns serious enough to require formal investigation. Meghan's response to this investigation was to deny the premise and assert that it was itself an attack, a coordinated attempt by the institution to undermine her. The investigation's findings were never made public. The palace concluded the inquiry internally, and the whole episode was effectively buried under the avalanche of larger controversies that followed. But it did not go away, because these things never truly go away. They become part of the accumulated record, part of the evidence base against which subsequent claims of victimhood are evaluated. Part of the reason why, when Meghan presents herself as a woman who was persecuted by an institution that could not tolerate her presence, an increasing number of people find themselves recalling these earlier accounts and drawing their own conclusions. Let us talk about the Oprah interview with the honesty it deserves, because it has been treated with a reverence in certain quarters that the facts do not entirely support. The interview, broadcast in March 2021, was watched by an estimated 17 million people in the United States alone. It was a television event of genuine cultural significance, and it contained moments of undeniable emotional power. Harry's description of his mental health struggles, his sense of being trapped, his fear for his family's safety, were delivered with what appeared to be genuine anguish, and they resonated. But it also contained claims that were, to put it with maximum precision, problematic. The allegation of racism within the royal family, that a member of the family had expressed concerns about how dark Archie's skin might be before his birth, was presented as established fact and left the world with the unmistakable impression that the senior royal family was institutionally and personally racist. The identity of the alleged commentator was withheld, which is a rather remarkable editorial choice when you are making one of the most serious allegations imaginable against a family, on international television, to an audience of tens of millions. Subsequent accounts have raised significant questions about the context of this conversation, the identity of the speaker, and whether the characterization provided in the interview accurately reflected what was said, and in what spirit. These questions have never been satisfactorily resolved, in part because Meghan and Harry have shown no interest in resolving them, because resolved questions generate no further coverage, whereas unresolved allegations can be revisited indefinitely. The claim that Archie was denied a royal title and security protection because of racism was subsequently complicated by the revelation that the rules governing titles for great-grandchildren of the sovereign were established long before Archie's birth and applied equally across the family. Whether those rules should have been changed for Archie is a legitimate debate. Whether their existence constitutes evidence of racist intent is a very different claim. The already mentioned false assertion about the private wedding ceremony, The claim that Meghan had received no support from the institution regarding her mental health, which was disputed by palace sources who indicated multiple offers of assistance had been made and declined. None of this means Meghan's experience was entirely fabricated.
With her jams, she said that she thought for such a long time, how can I scale up these jams? All my friends love these jams. Have you ever heard Meghan Markle talk about her love of jam? I haven't.
No, it's bullshit. It's a scam jam.
Bullshit.
The whole thing is a scam jam. And by the way, we're not even meant to call it jam. It's actually a spread. And I did want to move on to that now, actually, Lauren, because I know you have lots of doubts about exactly what Meghan is saying in...
None of it means the royal family is beyond criticism or immune to legitimate scrutiny. But it means that the Oprah interview, presented as raw, unfiltered truth, was, like everything else in the Sussex operation, a carefully managed piece of communication designed to achieve a specific effect. And the effect it achieved was temporary. Temporarily devastating for the palace, temporarily galvanizing for Sussex supporters, temporarily definitive in its reshaping of public perception, temporarily because public perception, it turns out, is not infinitely malleable. There are limits to how far it can be shaped by narrative alone, and those limits begin to become visible when the narrative keeps requiring the audience to disbelieve things they can see with their own eyes. They can see the Montecito mansion. The one that reportedly cost $14 million and sits in one of the most exclusive zip codes in America. They can see the private jets, the security convoys, the designer wardrobe that a woman who professes commitment to authentic, unpretentious values seems to update with considerable regularity. They can see the lifestyle brand, American Riviera Orchard, that was announced with a sophisticated social media strategy, complete with carefully selected celebrity recipients of branded jam jars, and which subsequently produced a deafening silence on the question of what actual products were available for actual consumers to actually purchase. They can see the With Love Meghan Netflix show, which received reviews ranging from politely underwhelming to actively contemptuous, and which seemed to confirm what detractors had long suspected, that beneath the carefully maintained presentation of effortless grace and natural warmth, there is a great deal of effort and very little that is natural. They can see the Spotify deal, terminated without renewal, the Netflix children's show, cancelled before broadcast, the Archetypes podcast, not renewed for a second series. They can see a commercial trajectory that was supposed to demonstrate the unassailable power of the Sussex brand and has instead demonstrated its surprisingly limited shelf life outside the context of royal controversy. And now they can see the lawyers, sent to a palace, with a bill. The question of Harry deserves to be examined with something approaching compassion, even within a critical analysis of the broader Sussex situation. Because Harry is not, in the final assessment, a villain in this story. He is something considerably more complicated and considerably more pitiable than a villain. He is a man who was broken by grief at an age when children should not be broken, who spent decades trying to manage that brokenness through public service and private self-destruction, who finally found someone who offered him what appeared to be solid ground, and who has been walking away from everything else ever since in the belief that this ground would hold. The signs that it might not have been quite as solid as advertised have been accumulating for years. The progressive estrangement from William, not just the political estrangement, but the personal one, the loss of the relationship with the only other person on earth who truly understood what it meant to lose Diana the way they lost her. The severing of friendships, the departure from the country, the legal battles, the public accusations, the memoir, and now the lawyers and the demand. At each stage, Harry has appeared less like a man freely choosing his path and more like a man being guided, steered, with great skill and apparent care, away from every anchor that might give him independent perspective, every person who might offer him an alternative view. Every relationship that existed before Meghan entered his life has either been significantly diminished or severed entirely. This is not a pattern that reflects well on the person doing the steering. And it is a pattern that those who genuinely care about Harry, those few remaining people in his life who are in a position to care about him without agenda, watch with considerable anxiety. Because the Sussex commercial empire needs Harry's royal identity. It needs the prince. It needs the connection to the crown, the constant low-level hum of royal association that gives everything the Sussexes do its cultural voltage. Without that, without the titles, without the history, without the ongoing drama of the royal estrangement, there is no Sussex brand. There is just a Californian lifestyle influencer and her husband, competing in an already saturated market with insufficient product to justify the attention. Harry's value to this enterprise is not as a person, it is as a symbol. And whether Harry understands that, whether he can see himself clearly enough to recognize the role he is playing in someone else's story, is perhaps the most important question of all the British public, has a quality that commentators sometimes underestimate because it does not always express itself loudly or immediately. It is the quality of long memory combined with slow patience. The British public will give you considerable latitude. It will extend good faith well past the point where other cultures might have withdrawn it. It will make allowances for difficulty, for complexity, for the legitimate pressures of extraordinary circumstance. It is not at its core an ungenerous public, but it does not forget. And it does not ultimately forgive what it perceives as taking the mickey, as performing victimhood while living in luxury, as demanding sympathy while inflicting damage, as claiming to love a country you have systematically set about undermining. The British public's patience with Meghan Markle ran out some time ago. And the Commonwealth public, Australians, Canadians, New Zealanders, all the nations that have watched this drama unfold with varying degrees of bewilderment and irritation, followed at its own pace, reaching similar conclusions through similar processes of observation and assessment. Even the American public, Meghan's home turf, the market she prioritized when she chose California over Windsor, has shown signs of weariness. Approval ratings that were once remarkably strong have softened significantly. The cultural conversation that once positioned Meghan as a heroic figure fighting racist British aristocrats has evolved into something considerably more nuanced, as more information has emerged and as the Sussex commercial track record has accumulated its disappointments. And now the $330 million demand. Now the lawyers ejected from Buckingham Palace. Now this extraordinary, almost unbelievable episode that confirms, for anyone still requiring confirmation, that the Sussex relationship with the institution they left is not about healing, not about family, not about the children knowing their grandparents, not about any of the human goods that genuine reconciliation might deliver. It is about money. It has always been about money. And the palace, to its lasting credit, has decided that some truths are worth stating plainly, even if the statement takes the form of a closed door rather than a press release. Here is what the next chapter of this story looks like, because pattern recognition is not prophecy, but it is the next best thing. The Sussex legal team will regroup. There will be a period of relative public quiet, or what passes for public quiet in the Sussex operation, which generally means below-the-radar briefings to sympathetic journalists rather than an actual cessation of communication. There will be a recalibration of the demand, perhaps a reduction in the headline figure accompanied by a repositioning of the request as something more palatable, as a security arrangement, as a charitable framework, as a cultural exchange program for the children, wrapped in language designed to obscure the transactional core. And there will be more interviews, more content, more documentation of grievance and aspiration, and the ongoing project of being Meghan Markle in a world that she has decided does not sufficiently appreciate her. The lifestyle brand will be relaunched with fresh products and fresh optimism. The Netflix relationship will either be renewed on significantly different terms or replaced with a different streaming deal on roughly equivalent terms. There will be a book, there is always a book, and it will contain revelations calibrated to generate maximum press attention while maintaining just enough deniability to avoid outright legal action. And somewhere in Montecito, Harry will continue to be present, photographed occasionally, quoted rarely, positioned always slightly behind and slightly to the left, the supporting character in a story that began as his own and has become entirely someone else's. The palace will continue to function. King Charles will continue to reign. William and Kate will continue to represent the crown with the quiet, undramatic competence that is their particular genius, not the genius of performance, but the genius of persistence, of showing up, of doing the work without demanding that the world applaud every individual effort. And the institution, ancient, flawed, resilient, adaptable, will continue to outlast the people who thought they could bring it to its knees with a legal filing, and a price tag here is the truth that sits at the center of everything. The truth that all the Sussex communications strategy and all the legal maneuvering and all the carefully managed narrative has been constructed to obscure. You cannot commodify dignity. You cannot invoice integrity. You cannot put a market value on the kind of trust that is built not through dramatic gesture, but through years of quiet, unglamorous, consistent service. The British monarchy endures not because it is perfect. It endures not because its members are without fault or its history is without shame. It endures because beneath all the ceremony and the spectacle and the constitutional complexity, there is a contract, an implicit, unwritten, but deeply felt contract between the institution and the public it serves. A contract that says, we will be here, we will show up, we will not prioritize ourselves over the role. We will not put a price on our presence. Meghan Markle never understood that contract. Perhaps she was never equipped to understand it. Perhaps the background she came from, the industry she came from, the culture she came from, simply did not provide the framework for understanding why some things cannot and should not be transactional, but the failure to understand it does not excuse the consequences of that failure. And the consequences are visible, and they are significant, and they extend beyond Meghan herself to the man she married and the children she's raising, and the narrative she's constructing for them about what family means and what loyalty costs and what love is actually worth. The house of cards is falling. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, inevitably, in the way that things built without solid foundation.
Whereas for Harry, he's got nothing to do. Nothing has worked. He is now completely at a loose end, hence this desperation to sort of return to what he's always known and actually, deep down, what he really loves, which is being the royal prince.
Yeah, I think he probably was on a high when he was able to talk, his truth and everything after leaving the royal family, do his book, do the show.
Always eventually fall. This is the fundamental miscalculation at the heart of the Sussex strategy. And it is a miscalculation so profound, so architecturally embedded in everything they have done since 2020, that unpicking it requires us to go to the very beginning of the story and trace the thread all the way through to where it has led. So that is exactly what we are going to do in 2017, when the relationship between Harry and Meghan was confirmed publicly. There was a moment of genuine national warmth that should not be dismissed or retroactively rewritten simply because of what followed. The British public, and the global audience that follows the royal family with varying degrees of intensity, responded to the news with something approaching collective delight. Here was a love story with genuinely novel elements. A prince who had never quite found his footing, whose personal struggles had played out in the tabloids across 2 decades, who had spent his adult life defined primarily by his mother's absence and his family's complications. And a woman from outside the traditional royal social circle, mixed race, American, self-made in the modest but real sense of having built a career through her own effort rather than through inherited advantage. It was on paper a story worth celebrating. And people celebrated it, genuinely and without reservation. The cynical revision of this period, the attempt in some Sussex-adjacent commentary to present even the initial welcome as somehow compromised by underlying hostility, does not survive contact with the contemporaneous evidence. The crowds at the engagement announcement were real. The warmth of the press coverage in those early weeks was real. The public goodwill was real, and it was considerable, and it was freely given. What happened to it tells you everything. Goodwill is not a finite resource, but it is a conditional one. It persists in proportion to the behavior of the people who receive it. It sustains itself when those people demonstrate gratitude, demonstrate effort, demonstrate the willingness to meet generosity with reciprocal generosity. And it erodes slowly at first, then with gathering speed, when the people who receive it respond with demand, with grievance, with the suggestion that the goodwill was never sufficient in the first place and should have been accompanied by considerably more. That erosion in the Sussex case did not happen overnight. It happened across a series of moments, each one individually defensible if viewed in isolation, each one contributing to a cumulative impression that became, over time, impossible to reframe. The refusal to engage with certain royal protocols in ways that were read, rightly or wrongly, as disrespectful rather than reformist. The management of media access in ways that struck royal correspondents, accustomed to the established conventions of palace press relations, as controlling to the point of obstructiveness. The reports from staff, the increasingly tense dynamics with the broader royal household, the departure announcement, made without adequate consultation with the institution, and timed in ways that created maximum disruption and minimum opportunity for managed transition, and then the years that followed. Each one adding another layer, another interview, another accusation, another revelation from someone who had been inside and was now, for a price, willing to share what they had seen. The goodwill did not disappear in a single moment. It was spent incrementally until it was gone. We need to talk about money, because money is at the core of this story in ways that the Sussex communications operation has worked extremely hard to obscure. The obscuring technique is sophisticated and worth examining in some detail, because understanding it helps explain why so many people were sympathetic for so long. The Sussex narrative positions all financial considerations on the side of the institution. The palace is wealthy, entrenched, protective of its resources and its power. The Sussexes are independent, entrepreneurial, self-sufficient people who asked only to be allowed to support themselves rather than rely on public funding, and who were punished for that independence by an institution that could not tolerate the loss of control it represented. It is a compelling frame. It positions Meghan and Harry as the scrappy underdogs building something new against the resistance of an established power that feels threatened by their capacity to exist outside its orbit. There is just one problem. It is almost entirely inverted. The Sussexes are not financially independent of the crown. They are financially dependent on it in the most fundamental possible sense, not because they receive crown funding, but because their entire commercial value derives from royal association. The crown does not need the Sussexes. The Sussexes need the crown. And the demand for $330 million, delivered by lawyers to a palace as a precondition for reconciliation, is not the action of financial independence. It is the action of financial desperation dressed in the language of entitlement. Consider the trajectory. The Netflix deal, reportedly one of the largest ever given to a non-production company talent, has not produced a body of work remotely proportionate to its scale. The Spotify deal ended without renewal. The lifestyle brand exists in a state of permanent almost launch. The memoir, while commercially successful, generated its sales almost entirely from its capacity to damage the royal family, which is to say, it traded on royal association in the most direct and most destructive way imaginable. Every revenue stream, every commercial relationship, every speaking fee and every brand partnership and every streaming deal flows from one source, the fact of having been royal. The ongoing drama of the royal estrangement, the perpetual, renewable, commercially exploitable conflict with the institution. Without the crown, there is no Sussex brand. Without the prince, there is no Duchess. Without the palace that ejected their lawyers, there is no story to tell, no grievance to monetize, no platform to leverage. The demand for $330 million is not a negotiating position. It is a confession. A confession that the Sussex operation understands at some level that the source of its commercial oxygen is the very institution it has spent 5 years attacking, and that attacking it, while profitable in the short term, is not a sustainable business model, because eventually you run out of new accusations. Eventually, the public has heard the story enough times that it stops paying to hear it again. Eventually, the streaming platforms do their own analysis and conclude that the audience for Sussex content is smaller and more volatile than the initial numbers suggested. Eventually, the lawyers come back from the palace empty-handed, and someone in the room has to ask the question that has been hovering, unasked, over the entire operation for years. What happens when the crown stops being interesting enough to fight? There is a dimension of this story that receives insufficient attention in most mainstream coverage, partly because it requires a degree of cultural specificity that international audiences may find difficult to access, and partly because it complicates the narrative of institutional racism that has been so central to the Sussex public presentation.